Welcome to Mountain Man Explore the Truth. How's everyone doing today or tonight, depending on the time you're listening to the podcast? I hope you are doing well. Today we're going to be welcoming on Rich. He's had 4 up-close encounters, and he's been researching for a long time, since 2005, so that's quite a long time. And he also helps victims that have been, disturbed by these encounters, and he helps them get better. And that's really awesome of him. He's a really interesting guy. I'm glad to have him on the show. It's an honor. So, guys, do me a favor. Hit that rate button, hit that follow button, and share away and download that episode before you play. It really helps a lot and brings the show up to the top for other people to listen to and other people to share their encounters and experience of anything in the world. And remember, guys, this show is based on anything. Bigfoot, cryptid, all kinds of things, and UFOs and paranormal, conspiracy theories. Anything's welcome, guys. Bring it on. And if you had an encounter, please email me at mountainmanett@gmail.com. Again, mountainmanett@gmail.com. Or you can private message me on Facebook. Look for Blake Botel, Botel. You should be able to find me on there and hit that message, and I'll check and make sure you're not in the spam or anything like that. So sometimes I see your messages go there, and I'll go check it out, and I'm sorry for the delay on the response. Anyways, guys, here we go. We're going to bring Rich on. Bear with me. Today we welcome on Rich. Rich, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Blake. Thanks for having me on.
It's an honor, man. What would you like to get into first?
Oh my gosh. Well, first off, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in. This is, not something that, anybody, has as a requirement. So this is all based on their interest and their passion for the subject. So, I have to salute anybody that's passionate enough to go out of their way and find sources like your podcast to be able to, to find out more and learn more. So first, thank them. And then, secondly, I'll just kind of preface everything that, we're probably going to talk about in that I'm the kind of researcher that's not afraid to put himself out on a limb somewhere and go in directions that either nobody considered or nobody else would. And that's there with my last two areas of research. The one previous to this, I authored a study on the emotional and psychological effects of cryptid encounters, mostly with Bigfoot. And most, researchers look at the creature and everything about the creature, whereas I took a very detailed look at the witness and what they went through, and not just the encounter that they had, but how it affected them sometimes more than 30 years after their encounters and things like that. And that was an experience. It was an eye opener to do that. Now I've moved on to, another subject that is very touchy with a lot of people. And I've started to compare the physical traits that are commonly reported, of Bigfoot when, during encounters. And I compare those to people that, human beings that have gigantism or acromegaly. And that's very tough when it's a very touchy place to go when you're taking, human beings, you're taking people who deserve all the respect that anyone else should, and then comparing them to a mythical creature a mythical creature in somebody's mind, but certainly not mine. But you comparing it to a wild animal, basically, and that's not that's not a subject a lot of people would take up. But if you do it right and you do it respectfully, then it can be done.
Mm-hmm. Well said. That's definitely well said right there, man.
So where do you want to go? How do you want to start this thing off?
Well, let's get into you got into some of your research and you're talking about right there. Let's get into some of the encounters you had.
Oh, well, the first one, my first encounter was in January of 2000, and it's a odd, pretty odd one when you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I was living and working in Western Maryland, and basically the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. And the young lady that I was seeing at the time had two small children. And we found ourselves in the middle of January. When you're in that region, when you get an unusually warm day, you take advantage of it. The high temperatures were up to around 60 degrees that day. So we took the kids out for a picnic, and that became stopping to visit friends, which became going out to dinner, and we ended up getting back home quite late. Her house was off the beaten path a good bit, and sat about 40, maybe 40 feet or so from the tree line of an extensive forest that was right there. And we pulled up, and her driveway, it was because she lived on the side of a hill, so her driveway went up, and the driveway actually circled around the house, made a loop around the house. And the place where we got out of there was, where we got out of, we usually parked, was between the tree line and the house. And as soon as we got out of the car, we could hear something moving in the woods. And it was obviously something big. It certainly wasn't a deer. It certainly wasn't squirrels or anything like that. It was something big moving around. And in that area, the thing you think about initially, I mean, immediately, is a black bear. And that is not something I wanted to tangle with at all, and certainly not at night, because this was maybe 10 o'clock at night that we were getting in there, somewhere between 9 and 10. And so she hustled her kids inside. It became my job to gather up all of the unused food and utensils and everything else from the picnic. And I didn't want to make two trips with a black bear rummaging around outside. So I filled up my arms, and I had to the point where I had to use my elbow to try and push down the hatchback of her car. Well, we got inside, everything was good, and she came back downstairs and put her kids to sleep, and went to the back door to look at, see if she could see the bear. And she realized at that point that my elbow was rather inefficient, and I didn't get the hatchback of her car pushed all the way down, and the dome light in her car was on. And she didn't want a dead battery the next morning, so somebody had to go out there and push that down. And of course, I'm not, chivalry's not dead. I'm not going to make her go out there and do it. So I had spent enough time in the woods to know that my eyes had adjusted to the light. And I was walking out in a situation where there was a black bear, and it was large. It was pretty dark outside. There was some ambient light there that, I mean, I can't remember exactly if the moon was full or whether it was near full, but there was moonlight. And about 200 feet away, there was a lamppost that was set where the driveway kind of split off from the direction that we were going, off to the left, where her uncle lived up the road a piece. Excuse me. So they had put a lamppost there to be able to see when they wanted to turn off. So there was some light to be had, but I went to the back and I turned out the interior light that was there, and I turned off the light that was outside in order to try and let my eyes adjust as best I could. And after a few minutes, I got comfortable with what I could see out there. So I stepped out, and the entire time my attention from that point was focused on one point of the tree line. In that region, there's a lot of bushes and briars that grow, and the entire tree line around the house there, near the house there, was all bushes and briars. Excuse me there. And those rose up to about where the canopy of the trees were, about 5 feet off the ground. So it made a pretty solid barrier, except for one point, which is where there was a space there where the briars and everything had been cleared out. It was about 15 feet wide, and that's where we would go back into the woods to go hiking, or take your kids back there to play in the woods or whatever. And unbeknownst to me, at this time, she would take food that was about to go bad and dump it right there for animals to eat, so it wouldn't go to waste. But at that time, I didn't know that. So I'm walking out there and I'm walking to the back of the car and I've got my eyes fixed on this place in there in the in the tree line. It's maybe 5 feet high and about 15 feet wide. I get to the car, push down on the hatchback. The light goes out, and the moment I pushed down on the hatchback, I saw movement in that space. And what first, and I mean, this is weird feeling number one that I got. You would think that the movement that I saw would have been maybe across that space in the in the tree line, or maybe even coming out of it. But the what struck me was that the movement that I saw was something moving straight downward, and it was next to the left edge of this space. And I stared at it, looked, and I could see a shape in this space, and it wasn't the same color as the dark black background that the dark forest behind it had, and it looked a little brown to me. And then weird feeling number two comes up, was the fact that this thing was absolutely huge. The head of it was right up to the canopy of the trees, about 5 feet off the ground. And it took up a huge chunk of that space on the left side of it. And as I looked at it, I could see broad shoulders sticking straight out. And of course, in my mind at this time, I'm looking at a bear. And because, going into this incident, you could pretty much categorize me as a Bigfoot agnostic.
Mm-hmm.
I had heard stories and, things like, I saw TV shows, things like that. And it wasn't a big deal to me. I didn't think about it, at all. So I'm looking at this thing and I'm thinking, that is a weird, what kind of bear has shoulders like that? Because a bear is slope shouldered, especially when it sits down. The shoulders slope off very quickly, even on the larger animal.
Oh yeah.
Okay, and but the biggest black bears you get out there are maybe 300, 350 pounds, and this thing was way bigger than that. And I just kept staring at it. It was maybe 40 feet from me, and as I looked at it, I could see knees kind of sticking up diagonally to either side. I mean, it looked like a baseball catcher squatted down.
Oh,
And
okay.
I'm thinking to myself, what kind of bear sits like that?
Mm-hmm.
Because a bear will do like a dog and sit down on its haunches, or it'll just sit right down on its behind and its feet will stick out front. And I'm looking at this thing and looking at this thing, and it was just absolutely befuddling to me. I didn't understand what it was at the time, but what I was experiencing was called cognitive dissonance, which means you're getting input, you're experiencing something and your brain's just not processing it. And I'm watching this and watching this, and it must have been for a little bit more than a minute that I just sat there, or you just stood there and stared at this thing, thinking like, what kind of crazy bear is this? And then from behind me, I hear, my lady friend at the time, she's like, what are you trying to do? Get killed? And immediately I just snapped back to reality and realized where I was. I was standing on the far side of a car. The car was between me and the house, and I had about 20, 25 feet to go before I could get back in. And this huge bear, in my mind, is about 40 feet from me. And of course, what's the first rule that you learn when you encounter a bear in the wilderness, which is don't run. Because whether they're hungry or not, they'll chase you, they'll catch you, and they'll hurt you.
Yeah, that always seems
And
to be people's
yeah,
instant reaction. Run! Don't run.
no, don't do it. And
Yeah.
don't try to climb a tree either. They can climb a tree faster than they can run. So I, I had been around the woods enough to know this, been out there enough. So I just started backing up around the car and back towards the door, keeping my eyes on this animal. And I got about 10 feet and that thing hadn't moved. So I went, okay. And I just turned around and walked back into the house. All done. Everything's good. We stayed up for a little while to make sure there were no problems, and there weren't. So, that done and gone, right? I had seen a couple of buddies of mine after that, that were avid hunters, and I told them about this, and they were like, "Oh, no way, you didn't see anything that big. There's nothing that big around here." And I told them, I said, "Okay, but I know what I saw. You guys better just be careful when you're out there." All right, let's fast forward 5 years to 2005. I was no longer with that young lady. I was with the lady. I was with my wife now. I'd met a lady and got married.
Mm-hmm.
We had moved from Maryland to Orlando, Florida, and one of the things I deal with is fits of insomnia. It goes for stretches where I have a hard time sleeping, and I was experiencing that one night and flipping through the TV channels, about 2 or 3 in the morning, I guess it was, and I came across a show on Bigfoot. And I literally said these words out loud. I said, "Oh, this will put me to sleep," and started to watch it. And about 15 minutes into the show, a gentleman from the state of Washington got on there and described what he had seen. And what he had seen matched up about 95% to what I had witnessed 5 years before in Maryland. And what he was describing was a Bigfoot that was squatted down on his porch of his house. That had gotten up onto the porch and then squatted down to try to evade being seen. And it immediately, 5 years and 1,000 miles away, removed from my incident, I broke out immediately into a cold sweat. My hands started to shake. And I went to the bathroom to splash some water on my face, and I looked in the mirror, and all the color had drained from my face. The realization of what I had seen that night hit me like a sledgehammer. And that's, my experience, or one of my experiences, that led me to the research that I did in the emotional and psychological effects of encounters with cryptids.
Mm-hmm.
And because I went into a stress response, I went into a response to trauma, and it's something that happens in the real world all the time, from different sources.
Yeah.
Like people that are in a particularly violent car accident, or people that are that experience chronic abuse, or witness an act of violence, or anything like that.
Oh yeah.
Our brain has this mechanism and how we react to things. And unbeknownst to me, that's what I was experiencing at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And for the next 3 days, I kind of walked around in this fuzzy kind of stupor, going through this trauma response with this event playing over and over in my head. And, I kind of experienced the shock and the fear of it five years later.
Yeah, I always feel that kind of situation where people dealt with some kind of experience like that and it traumatizes them, and I feel like that really confirms their truth. You know what I mean? And because some people be acting like, "Oh, no big deal. I saw a Bigfoot." It's gonna mess with you.
Yeah, it's almost never that case.
Yeah.
And as luck would have it, and from Florida, I lived in Florida for a little while, and then I moved out here to New Mexico, where I live now. And I got involved in the mental behavioral health field here, working with kids that have behavior issues and things like that. And the kind of things that I was hearing from them about the effects that they were having, and from their traumas and everything like that, were the same things I was hearing from Bigfoot witnesses after that. The same types of stuff going on, nightmares and night terrors, and problems that, when they think about the incident, when the incident comes back in their head, that they start having these physiological effects, like their heart starts to beat faster, they breathe, they get shallow, they breathe more shallow. I mean, they can't, get the breath out of them. It's amazing what I was hearing, and I noticed the correlation between the two, and that's what led me to do the study that I did. I started the study in 2017 and spent 3 years doing it. I was, no, actually, it's late 2016. I did, I guess, and spent 3 years doing it. I interviewed over 400 people initially, and all with the focus on their experience and how it affected them. And I ended up using 148 of those cases for the study that I had. And basically, it was just documenting all of these different effects that these encounters had on these witnesses after the fact. And it was, I mean, obviously it was a ton of work, because most of the people, I mean, all of the people that I interviewed at least twice. And then it was trying to vet these people and vet their stories and go through there and what worked and what didn't. And that was the hardest part of it. And then after that, it was basically just compiling data. And I was able to release that in 2019, summer of 2019. And the reactions I got from that were very interesting. As you well know, when research comes out or a sighting report comes out in the Bigfoot community, there's a lot of scrutiny on it, and there's a lot of people take a lot of hits for making assertions and different things like that. And trust me, I was ready for it, because at that point I'd been researching about 14 years, and I'd seen the reactions people had, and I could see how caustic things could get when it came down to it. And so I released this thing, and I put it on the National Cryptid Society, put it on their website, and then I released it also straight to I believe it was 16 different Bigfoot groups on Facebook. And I put it out there, and then I just braced myself. And what I got was crickets. I got barely any negative feedback at all. I mean, I think maybe 3 people came up with something negative to say about it. And then after that, it was just a very quiet response. And it kind of surprised me, in that way, because I was expecting, the wolves to come, feed.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's pretty interesting.
yeah, nothing. I mean, I was virtually no blowback from that at all.
It's kind of
Which,
surprising, really, isn't it?
without a doubt,
Yeah.
without a doubt, and I think the most disappointing thing was that I was ready. I was ready for the arguments. I was ready to go, and nobody had them for me. So, it was unusual that way.
Yeah, you probably had
But,
them stumped, biting their tongue, going, Yeah.
and I think what it is that a lot of the Bigfoot community are about the stories, about the sexy stories that go on there, and they make you go, oh wow,
Yeah.
and things like that. And whereas what I did is this study, I kept it as close to the scientific method, within the scientific method, as I possibly could.
Mm-hmm.
And I made no conclusions based on it. I mean, it wasn't about do they exist or don't they. It wasn't about any of those kind of things. It was about the people involved, and that was tough to listen to some of those stories, because some of those folks had a really tough time after that. And when you think about it, when you have a traumatic event like that in your life, every time that you think about it, you relive it, and it comes back in stark detail. I mean, ridiculous detail.
Mm-hmm.
The encounters that I've had, I can describe them to you, to very, very fine detail. And that's what these folks could do. One of the techniques that I use to, help people work through the trauma from these things is this, as I tell them, first thing is just sit down and write it all out, and put in every detail you can remember, whether you think it's important or not, just include it. And, some of these folks will give me 12,000 words.
That's very
When it
important
comes
to do
down
that.
to an encounter that lasted less than a minute. And
Mhm.
it's incredible what happens, in the mind.
Mhm.
And the shocking thing about that is in the follow-ups that I did with that, of the 148 people that I used for the study, there were 22 of them that went to get mental health support. And what they got was very, very surprising to me on that one. Seven of these 22 people got in and got treatment, and it lasted 6 months or more, and they were able to work their way through it. But six people out of the 22 were diagnosed with mental health disorders. And one of the things I did to vet people on there is that they had no personal history or no family history of any mental health diagnosis. And I didn't do that to cast doubt on the other people that did. I did that so there wouldn't be any questions about their mental state going into these things. And four of those six people were told they had schizophrenia, just out of the blue, no family history, no nothing.
Mhm.
And then there's one that was told that they were told they were bipolar, and then one that was told that she had early onset dementia at the age of 38. So that'll tell you how prepared the mental health field was for these people to walk in there. And it's there were even a couple of there were a couple of people on there in that had gone to get mental and behavioral health support and
Mhm.
been turned away, which is unheard of in the mental health field. It's just amazing. But they were turned away simply because of what they reported caused the trauma for them.
Yeah, I've
And
learned that people will suffer the PTSD, and I had one person come on that suffers that, and yeah, she's gonna be coming back on the show too to talk more, and she's doing pretty well getting her support and help as well.
I mean, it's hard. You got to find somebody that's got an open mind and somebody who will treat the cryptid encounter, the Bigfoot encounter, like a car accident or witnessing an act of violence or any of those kind of things, and we'll just look at the person, and that's the difference. You need in helping somebody out with that, you need to look at them as a human being who is struggling, and they need that support to be able to get through that. It doesn't matter what they say is the problem when it comes down to it. You just got to help them get through that and be able to come to grips with it, and then you can address that. And there's apparently there's some folks out there in the field that don't want to even be connected with it. And you mentioned PTSD, and that PTSD is a situation where actual psychological damage is done to a situation and things like that. And what I found is in the difference between people that had cryptid encounters and the people that had all other kind of sources of their trauma, uh, those people that had the conventional sources of trauma really don't want to talk about their experience again.
Mhm.
It's hard to draw it out of them a lot of the times because retelling is reliving. And again, these folks, they remember stuff in tremendous detail. That's why this trauma has the impact that it does. What I found with people that had cryptid encounters, and it was kind of odd, was that they wanted more than anything else to tell somebody about it. They wanted to talk about it so much, but the reason why they didn't was because they didn't want to face the ridicule and the doubt and the harassment that sometimes happens with people that report these things. And it's nowhere near as bad these days as it used to be. Back, 2010 or so, when I really started talking to people and interviewing witnesses, um, it was bad. It was bad,
Oh yeah.
and people would get harassed and worse. I talked to one fellow who lost his job because he actually came out and talked about it openly at work and was told not to come back. And
That's
that's the way it used to be. These
yeah, that's
days,
ridiculous.
the Bigfoot experience is a little more mainstreamed. At least people are familiar with at least seeing the images and the messing with Sasquatch and all that kind of stuff. So they're a little desensitized to it, but it's still a huge concern for people to do it. So what do you do when there's nothing more you want to do than talk about something, but you're afraid to,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And you get trapped. It's kind of a trap there. So I named it Cryptid Encounter Syndrome. It has a lot of the earmarks of PTSD, but that critical difference makes it a different thing. And and really I was the first person that some of these folks had talked to. One gentleman I talked to had his encounter 36 years before I talked to him, and he hadn't talked to anybody about it. And he had seen one of my Facebook posts in one of the groups and say, hey, looking for people to interview, and no strings attached, anything like that, totally anonymous, that kind of thing. And he said I don't know why. He said it just sounded like the right thing to do. It sounded like it would be okay. And you think about that, 36 years
Yeah, that's a
of
long time.
anxiety and
Mm-hmm.
nightmares and waking up screaming in the middle of the night with sweat, drenched in sweat, and all the different effects that you're going to have. It's incredible when you think about it. Every time you go through that and it triggers that response again, your body goes into, or your brain releases what's called cortisol. And cortisol is to the brain basically what adrenaline is to the body. And it fires up your brain and gets you ready for, to handle, what's going on, your trauma response. And that puts you into a state of mind that's akin to ADHD. And for most of us, that lasts 30 to 90 minutes. And then the cortisol dissipates and your body comes back to normal. Uh, with these folks, now you think about that. If this traumatic incident comes back into their minds 3 times in a day, you go through that 3 times in a day. And to go through that fog that you don't usually have, or the challenge of it, to be able to deal with those kind of things, it's tough. Saying it's tough is a description, but it's no matter what I say, it's not going to give you the fair description of what it actually is going through with it. That's what I was experiencing after I realized what I had gone through in my first encounter, and it dominated my mind. There's nothing else I could think about for 3 days. And you're talking about going through life and going to your job for 3 days, and not really sleeping much and not really going through, any of that that you normally do. And, I was lucky at the time. My wife, she noticed something was wrong, and she just looked at me and she said, hey, you're not right. What's going on? And that is a point where people find out who really cares about them, because I used what I call the words, and everybody who has a real fear of sharing what they went through speaks these words to who they're talking to. And the words are, I just don't think you're going to believe me. And that is a huge gap to cross between you and somebody else. That's bridging that isolation that you have from people about this subject. And it's very, very hard for people to do. It's an unspeakable torture when you think about it, to go out there and, when you consider that the vast, vast, vast majority of Bigfoot encounters are random, they're accidental. Very few people that go out looking for this thing find it, and most of the time people run across these things. It's, just an incredible circumstance that happens. The thing crosses the road in front of their vehicle, or it, all of a sudden, bam, there they are on the trail that they're walking down, or,
Mm-hmm.
anything, any number of things like that.
Yeah, like
And
hunting and
a
all
lot of
that.
times a lot of times Bigfoot finds them, and that's what happens. So, but so when you factor in that randomness that you got of all that, and you're coming across something that your reality tells you shouldn't exist, and you're confronted with this thing right in front of you. You know, you can see it, you can hear it, sometimes you can even smell it, and it's as real as anything you've ever seen, but it's not supposed to be. What does that do to your mind? What does that do to your, to your psyche? And it's an amazing place um, to look into with people, and that's why I've continued working with some witnesses that are have been dealing with that trauma and don't know what to do.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's it's something that's not supposed to be real, and it puts a person's mind at like, what am I looking at, and it's really well
Mhm.
said what you said there.
No, thanks. And there's a story from one of the people that I interviewed that I shared that'll really give you the impact of what these encounters are about. What how much it can really get to you. The gentleman that I talked to, we'll call him Bill. Okay,
Hmm.
Bill was a young guy who was just getting out of high school and had signed up to go into the military. And he had maybe, a couple of weeks before he had to report. His family owned about 40 acres out in out in the country, and it was actually that 40 acres butted up against a lake. And this was a place where he had gone his whole life, as a young man. That was his escape. That's where he really loved to be. He went fishing, did all kinds of things there, playing in the woods and all that. And he decided he was going to take one last weekend at the location and enjoy himself and then go report, to the military. Well, he got there. He rode a motorcycle there. He got there, and they had a small cabin, and something was wrong immediately because he could see the cabin door had been pushed in, and that was kind of crazy because the door actually opened outward. And so he walked in, looked around, looked like the place had been rummaged through, but nothing was really missing. It was stuff had been, strewn everywhere. But he just thought somebody got in, kids got in there and vandalized it and whatever. And he spent some time cleaning up and getting the door fixed and everything, and decided that he was going to go fishing. And got his gear and walked over to where the beach was, and um, got everything set up and sat there. And he said about 15 minutes after that, he started to get this incredible feeling of dread. And he said it was the weirdest feeling that he would ever, because he was in the one place in the world that he could be the most relaxed and the most at ease. And he was feeling this dread, like, man, I shouldn't be here. That kind of feeling like it was dangerous or something. And so after a few minutes of that, he just couldn't stand it anymore. He said, I got to get out of here, and gathered up his gear, took it back to the cabin, got everything. And, the stuff that he had unpacked, he packed back up again and, went to get on his motorcycle and take off. And it's a dirt access road that went out to the main road. And he got out on this dirt access road and started taking off. And then as he's leaving, out from behind a big tree right next to the road comes this arm he said it was just unnaturally long. It was unbelievably long, and it had kind of a reddish brown fur on it. And this arm, took a swipe at him as he went by. And he said he had to duck, and he could feel the wind of this going over his head. That's how close it was. And he got his motorcycle and took off and got out of there. And he never told anybody about it when he got it, back home or anything like that. And then the next week he went and, fulfilled his enlistment. Well, this is a guy who, been hunting his whole life and everything. And they found out very quickly in basic training that he was a great marksman. So they sent him to sniper school. And then out of sniper school, he got attached to a unit that was on the ground in the Balkan Wars back in the 90s. And their job was to go through and stop all, to stop as much of the ethnic cleansing and everything and atrocities like that were going on. And he saw basically, everything you can think of what it's like for another human being to be as inhumane to somebody else as they possibly could. He said he witnessed it a lot, and and he said, they got tired of seeing it, so his group even, used the same kind of techniques, to punish people that were doing it. And he went through all that. He did a 2-year hitch going through all that. He was through most of it. And coming out of that, he a few more years in the military, and then came out and got into metalworking. That was his thing after the military. Mm-hmm. He told me that through everything that he went through, everything that he witnessed as part of warfare, the most terrifying thing that he could talk about was that arm coming out from behind that tree and taking a swipe at him as he went by. And Bill said that his military training had sort of prepared him for what he was going to experience in that setting. And, the mutual support that he got from, the men that he was serving with, going through all that, helped as well. But he told me that the invasion into his one place in the world that he valued and felt best at, was enough to just shake him. And he was about 20 years after that he was talking to me about it, and it still bothered him. His military, what he experienced in the military didn't bother him at all. He said he had no nightmares about it, had no problems talking about it. It wasn't a big deal. But this particular incident, he didn't talk to anybody about. And that's how much these encounters can impact people. You figure somebody who's been through what he had been could handle it a lot better than he was. And that's how deep into our souls that these kind of encounters can reach.
Mm-hmm. It's very true. I have a recent guy come forward to me. He's in the area where I live, and he's definitely not comfortable talking about it right now. He's a hunter. He was out bow hunting, and he happened to ran into one of these things out there, and he couldn't explain it. He wasn't a believer, and he ran into this, and he's been pretty messed up. He can barely talk about it. I could see it in his face. I was like, oh. I go, you take your time, man. You need to heal, and if you ever want to talk about it, you let me know, even on or off there, And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, he's pretty messed up
and
over it.
yeah, and you don't know how many people I've talked to that were avid, outdoors people. This go camping all the time, hunting all the time, and everything like that, and they have this encounter, and they either won't go back to that spot again, or they won't go back at all into the woods. And that's, that when you have something that changes your life that much, it's a huge thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reason why I did that study was, number one, for those folks that are going through that, to let them know that somebody out there recognizes them. Researchers have a tendency to do what I call rush the creature. They'll go to talk to a witness, and they'll say, hey, what did it look like? How big was it? What color was its fur? Did it smell? Did it do this? And they'll sit there and talk about this, and they basically, the witness starts to feel like, a dish rag that's getting wrung out. And what I've found to be able to do is walk up to a witness and say, hey, how are you feeling? How are you doing with this? And when you put the focus on them and not the creature, they understand, they start to feel a lot more engaged. Somebody cares about them. Somebody's seeing them, for somebody who's going through this experience. And man, I'll tell you, if you ever get somebody to talk about these experiences, approach it that way. Boy, I'll tell you what, I hope you have an afternoon,
Yeah,
because these folks will just unload everything.
That's a good way
Because
to
they
go
know
with it,
they're.
Rich. Sorry to interrupt you. That's a good way to go with it because that's the way it should be. You need to talk to the person like he's a human being or she, and get them comfortable and make sure they're doing okay before going into what they've seen. So well said,
Because
well
they're
said.
coming in. Yeah, they're coming into that interview in a situation that, okay, they're already going to talk to a stranger about something that's really bothering them. That's a real problem for them. And when that person reaches out and said, "Hey, I see you. I feel what you're feeling. I understand it. Talk to me about it. Tell me about it." And then, the defensiveness goes away, the fear of ridicule goes away because you're interested in them, and that's huge. And that's one thing I'd recommend to anybody who, whether you're a researcher or whether you're just somebody who runs across somebody that has a story, approach it that way. Approach it in a very human to human type of way, because that person is going. I mean, if you ask about the creature, that person's going to tell you about the creature. If you ask them about their experience, you're going to get all the information that you would have gotten about the creature anyway, and a
Mm-hmm.
whole lot more, because they're going to feel more comfortable talking with it. They're going to feel more reassured that they've got somebody that actually cares about what they went through.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you
So,
100% on that.
yeah,
That's
and I help, as I said, I help witnesses get through it. These kind of things, help them, build some coping mechanisms, help them, realize, that, that it's just, it may be a major event that happened to you, but it's in your rear view mirror. It's behind you, and your life moves forward. So I try to get people to look forward and how to live with that,
mm-hmm.
and how to live with that as part of their lives.
See, we need more people like that in the Bigfoot world, researchers in general, because you're right. A lot of them just want to get right to the point when they should just learn a little more about that person before getting some questions they want answered.
One of the things I do as a researcher is, if I'm going to go talk to somebody, I make it the only thing I have on my schedule for that day. I don't want to do anything else. And I can't tell you how many people that I've gone to talk to, and I meet them at 10 o'clock, and I end up staying for 10 o'clock in the morning, end up staying for dinner, because the discussion goes and goes and goes, and they usually have about 10,000 questions that they want to go through. And I'm one of those people that I just lay it out there. I don't care to paint myself as an expert. um, there are certain facets of this thing that I know a little bit more about than most people do, but that doesn't make me an expert, because nobody's an expert in this field.
You're
No
right.
one you talk to
You're
can
right.
tell you
Nobody is.
everything about what's going on. So there's no expert. It's not like doing algebra where people know everything about algebra. It's about this particular phenomenon that we only know so much about. We were talking prior to going on here, and the Bigfoot phenomenon is a jigsaw puzzle that has 1,000 pieces to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the best researchers, the best people in this field have about 150 pieces put together. There's just a ton that we don't know, to the point where sometimes we don't even know the right questions to ask.
Exactly.
You got to sit back and think about it, and really work, and try to do better. And that's what I try to do with my research. I have no problem, when somebody asks me something, and to look them straight in the eye and say, I don't know. I get asked about things like that all the time. Are they aliens? What about these portals that they disappear into? What about the orbs? The light, the balls of light that seem to accompany them. And I have to sit there. I have to be honest, and tell them, look, I don't know. I don't know anything about those things. I've heard stories. I've interviewed people that talked about it, um, but I've never experienced it myself. I don't know much about it at all, and I have no problem with that.
It
And
definitely catches your attention.
you have to approach this thing, um, with some humility,
Mm-hmm.
and to be able to walk in and say, I'm not an authority on this. I'm somebody who spends a lot of time on it, but it doesn't make me, superior to anybody else when it comes to this field. Your work, you know, the way you do your work. and what you're able to find and what you're able to present speaks to, what you know.
Mm-hmm.
And until we figure this thing out, until we totally get the truth out there about it, there's nobody who can convince me that they're an expert.
I agree with you 100% on that. There's a lot of people that are known Bigfoot. I don't know what you want to call them, researchers or famous people. I don't know, but they like to, confirm that they're an ape or something else, and it's like, how do you know that? Because they do what by researching behavior like ape. I don't know. I still confused on that. I don't know how they think it's an ape.
Well, the thing is, there's no way it could possibly be an ape. And I hate to break people's, break people's vision of this thing, but the footprint evidence alone dismisses the fact that they could be apes, because you're looking at a foot that's adapted for upright walking and
Mm-hmm.
adapted extremely well. There are researchers out there, and I'm not going to be a name dropper or anything like that, but I've talked with some big names in this field, and they'll tell you that the footprint research shows that the foot is adapted, number one, for upright walking, and number two, for carrying very large amounts of weight
Mm-hmm.
when it comes down to it. Because our a human foot is longer and thinner, okay, but when you get into a foot that's adapted to carry a lot more weight, the foot broadens, especially down around the heel, and that it's wide and it's long, and the adaptation that you get, and some of the big footprints they have, is for that mid tarsal break. In other words, there's like an extra hinge in the foot there, and that helps you know the subject of that be able to move weight. Because when you think about it, when you walk, there is 50% of the time when you're walking that 100% of your weight is on one foot, and that foot has to be able to support the weight of whoever's there. And there's a lot of human beings that are bigger size, and I'm in my real life, I'm a basketball coach for high school kids, and I follow basketball players. Well, there's a lot of basketball players, all of them really big guys,
Mm-hmm.
who have had their careers limited or ended because of chronic breaks in the foot, in the tarsal metatarsal area, and it doesn't allow them to be able to number one, be that big, and number two, go through the activities that they do, and have the bones in the foot be able to support that all the time. If you remember Yao Ming, he was a very popular guy playing in Houston. Guy came from China. He was a very big guy. His career ended because of that. You're in Oregon, you may even remember Arvydas Sabonis. He was a big guy for the Portland Trailblazers,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and yeah, his career, same deal. The tarsal and metatarsal area of his feet just couldn't take the stress that they were going through, simply because if there would have been that extra hinge, at the tarsal metatarsal joint or the transverse tarsal joint in the foot, then he would have been able to bear the weight a lot better. Being a 270, 280 pound guy running up and down the basketball court doing what they were doing. And that's the adaptation that you have with the foot, just the foot. We can tell from the footprint evidence. Now, you go from there, you can't just adapt the foot to upright walking, because everything changes at that point. For upright walking to go from an ape to a creature that's adapted for upright walking like we are, there has to be a corresponding adaptation to the ankle and the knee and the hip, also the lower back and the neck. The neck, so you can face forward. You're not, excuse me, you're not stuck like what would ordinarily be a position for us to be looking upward. Now we got to face forward. So the neck has to be able to adapt to be able to do that. And you got to have those sets, that set of adaptations at minimum, to be able to make upright walking your primary mode of movement. And these are the questions that we got to ask. We got to ask more about this. What does this mean? What is the connection there? And it's this kind of study that's got me into my new field of research now, in comparing, the physical traits that people report from seeing Bigfoot to the physical traits of people of human beings that have gigantism and acromegaly, and it's fascinating stuff. It really
Hmm.
is.
You know that we're gonna have to call this show "Rich the Great Educator," man, because
I don't know about that,
no,
but
you got
uh,
some good details on educating, and it makes sense, and it kind of definitely reminds me of more like Ron Moorhead with his theory on things too. You know, he's a great educator on quantum physics and so on, and yeah, I definitely getting educated from you right now, and that's what I'm feeling.
well, I appreciate that. But Rod Moorhead, you talk about a guy who could have rested on just a couple of trips of field research. He could have had his reputation made just on that. But this is a guy who has gotten into uh, some areas that nobody would have. No, first, nobody even wanted to go. Nobody, few people would want to try and get into, and then even fewer people would want to try and connect with the Bigfoot phenomenon.
Hmm.
And he can talk about it in such great detail because the work that he's done is incredible.
It is.
And I heard when you had him on your podcast, and my comment to you was I could listen to him talk all day because he's got such information to offer everybody else, and his research goes in a direction totally away from what I do, and it still fascinates me. The man is amazing.
He is, you know, and I can't wait to check out his new book that's going to be, I don't know when it's going to be done, but I'm definitely interested in checking it out. He didn't really tell
Yeah.
much detail on it, but I'm definitely,
Well, and he hasn't released anything in a while too, so it'll
yeah,
be great to hear what
yeah.
to find out what he's been doing.
And I'm still looking up on his other books right now, and I'm trying to get caught up on those, and it's just, wow, making time to read. I'm not much of a reader, but I'm definitely starting to read a bit more into this stuff, you know, and it's not just Bigfoot I'm looking into. I'm looking into all kinds of things, you know, and that's what the show is going to be based on. But right now, I've been getting a lot of Bigfoot reports, and if I'm getting people to come on and talk about it and want to share it, they're more than welcome, and other things as well.
Well, I mean, there's so much. There's a wide spectrum
Hmm.
of these paranormal subjects that we don't. I mean, people just don't understand enough about it. When it comes to the Bigfoot phenomenon, comes to natural phenomenon. I can tell you the best people that I've found to talk to are First Nations people,
Oh yeah.
Native Americans. And, there's a ton of them around here in Albuquerque where I live. There's a lot of the First Nations Pueblos and everything that are around, and they're a tremendous resource of understanding and knowledge when it comes to the Bigfoot phenomenon. People don't understand it that on the reservations that are here, um, Bigfoot encounters are treated basically like nuisance animal encounters. Like something gets it, but the police come and they investigate it and everything, and because Bigfoot is part of their natural world, and it's not an unnatural thing for them. There's so many instances where these folks will tell you just matter of factly about different things that are happening, different traditions in their people and everything. It's incredible. I mean, when you think about in the Pacific Northwest where you are, there are totem poles that are 300-400 years old, and they have what looks like gorillas on them. And where does that come from? Because the gorilla wasn't even discovered, but maybe 100 years ago, a little bit more. And so, how did they know? Well, obviously, they had contact with these creatures. And if you listen to their folklore and you listen to their traditional stories, you'll learn a tremendous amount. And these folks are just amazing when it comes to speaking, about the subject. And that's, there's a lot of folks that I talk to that are from some of the different reservations here that have been invaluable resources.
They have been because I'm talking to one guy right now, and he's a busy guy, and I'll keep him short on detail, but he's gonna be coming on probably I'm hoping within a month, and he's got a lot of information to give out on his people that experience these things. They like to call them what was it that he called them? I already forget what he called them. I think he called them the woods people, or I can't remember the exact word what it
Well,
was.
the interesting thing about that is that First Nations people in North America have over 300 different names
Mm-hmm.
for these creatures,
They do.
and
Yeah.
and I think all but two include the word tribe, man, or people in the names.
Yeah,
So
that's
what
what I
does
think
that?
he called them, like
You know,
people of the woods or something.
yeah, what does that tell you about their understanding of this subject? They recognize that there's something that's not like them, but they recognize something familiar in them, in the way they act and the way they interact and work together or whatever. There's something familiar enough to refer to them as people or as a man or as a tribe,
Mm-hmm.
just like they would themselves.
I agree with you on it. Well, hey, Rich, I'm gonna be running out of space since my laptop's kind of running low on space for some reason. I thought I had cleared it out.
Well, I
Um,
warned you I was a talker. You got to stop me.
well, I want to bring you back on sometime if you're willing, and if you have any
Absolutely,
time.
absolutely.
So
Because there's a lot of things about the phenomenon I'd love to, talk about,
I think I could
do
probably do a
different things
few
like that.
episodes with you, to be honest.
Well, I just want to send a shout out real quick to my friends up in the Marinette Menominee area. That is the northern Wisconsin, um, Upper Peninsula Michigan border area. They're having the Marinette Menominee Bigfoot and Paranormal Convention this coming weekend,
Oh, awesome.
and it's that's I've been up there a couple of times to speak. You want to talk about a great time, that you go up there and it's a great event. um, you want country hospitality. These folks are amazing. They're absolutely amazing up there. And my good friend Craig Salk, who got that started, he's since passed away, and his wife Barb Salk, she's keeping the event going. And you may know Craig Salk. He was on, I think it was season 2 of Finding Bigfoot, when they went up into the Upper Peninsula onto his property to do an investigation up there. And he's been, he and now his wife Barb are just all about educating people on the experience, and and letting people know that they're okay. It's okay to talk about this. It's okay to share the stories and things like that. So yeah, go see him this weekend. It's about an hour north of Green Bay. If you have that opportunity, go see it. The Marinette Menominee Bigfoot convention. It's going on in Marinette, Wisconsin.
And what day was that on?
It's this Saturday and Sunday.
Oh, okay, cool. I'll try to get the episode up before then, that way so people can hear it, and if
That'd be great.
But yeah, it's been awesome. I'm gonna definitely bring you back, and
I'd be happy to. This is a subject that I can go deep on, and I'll just talk and talk.
yeah,
I'd love to.
that's what I'm trying to find is other people to come on. Like there's Claude, he's gonna be coming back on too. He had a weird incident happen to him, and he's kind of wanting to step away from the Bigfoot stuff because it gave him some fear, But I'm thinking he might come back around. But he talked to me in private about it, and he said he might be willing to come on and talk about it. If you go to episode 1, he's Claude, and yeah, he's been doing a research group, joined one, and then he kind of got shooken up by something, and I try not to talk too much about it for respect for him, but he definitely got traumatized by something.
Yeah, it's a tough place to be. It's a very tough place to be. And my it's my salute to anybody that wants to go out there in the field and encounter, and put yourself in those positions, because there was a time in my research career here where I put myself in a bad spot, and I know what it's like. I know what it's like to be there. So just you folks out there that are dealing with this, hang in there. There's people that'll listen. They really will.
Well, I appreciate it, Rich. Hang on for a minute, and I'll shut this off, and we'll definitely bring you back on. And thank you for coming on.
It's my pleasure.
Well, guys, I'd like to thank Rich for coming on the show. We even talked about him writing a book, and he said he's going to work on that, and that's awesome. I was hoping he would, because I tell you, listening to what he was saying, I definitely think he should write a book. And I was about to ask him on the show, but I forgot to. And I asked him off the air, and he says, yep, he's working on it. So that's awesome. We'll be bringing him back on the show, especially when he writes that book. Anyways, guys, I hope you got educated. I sure did. Anyways, until next time, guys, let's explore the truth. Oh, I can't forget, if you had an encounter, please email me at mountainmanett@gmail.com. Again, mountainmanett@gmail.com. Or you can private message me on Facebook for Blake Botel, Botel. And remember, share, rate, like, follow, do all that fun stuff for me, guys. I sure appreciate it. Make sure you download the episode before you play it. Anyways, guys, until next time, let's explore the truth together.